Hey everyone, welcome back. So this is just a quick video I'm gonna do. It's really late at night and I've just moved into my new place a few weeks ago, so I'm not totally used to it. I'm sorry the lighting probably sucks. And yeah, I don't entirely know what my video setup is gonna be for camera angles and stuff like that, but for now I just want to get these mini reviews posted. I'll admit I've had a really busy week, so I haven't put in too much effort into these reviews. I did listen to each of these albums at least a few times each, but I didn't have as much to say about them as I was hoping I would, but whatever. It's just, again, as always, just my personal opinion on these albums. So I just wanted to quickly go over a few albums and, yeah, just share some quick thoughts. Again, it's all just my opinion. Yeah, let's get right into the reviews. So I was actually considering making this one its own individual review, but I realized that was more because it would give me more time to discuss Lorde's previous albums, which I could go much more in depth on. But in short, Lorde's discography has to be one of the weirdest I've ever listened to. I recently re-listened to all three of her albums, and 2013's Pure Heroine really didn't click with me as much as I thought it would going back to it for the first time in a while. It did show some promise with a couple of great songs and an overall sound which felt mostly unique to Lorde. It was definitely very influential, but it's too shaky as a whole to be considered anywhere close to great. But 2017's Melodrama has to be one of the best pop albums of the 2010s by a landslide, if you ask me, at least if anything, anywhere close to the mainstream. And it was followed up by the shockingly awful Solar Power in 2021. I won't mince words, that follow up was probably the biggest drop in quality between albums that I have ever heard from any artist, and it made me completely clueless as to what to expect on Virgin in both sound and quality. So after giving this a couple listens, well, I really wish this was hitting a lot harder for me, but I just can't say I'm all that impressed. Don't get me wrong, this is much better than Solar Power, but it is probably her second weakest album to date, and it leaves me thinking Lorde is probably well past her prime, and I don't really expect much quality from her in the future after this really disappointing two-album run. In other words, yeah, this is a fairly big miss for me, and I understand why the critics have been so lukewarm. For one, I don't think the lyrics are as strong as they were on her previous albums, or her first two albums. There are a lot less witty lines, and it also just doesn't have the same resonance for me personally, and it doesn't feel as unique. I do like the occasional moment, like how Shapeshifter shows her realizing all the different versions of herself she's been and feeling like it's time for a real change. And What Was That has some nice lyrical detail, even though I don't think it's a super deep song poetically. But then there's the production, which at points can be enjoyable, such as in the glossy chorus of What Was That, or the gorgeous vocal layering of Shapeshifter. But usually the vocals are overemphasized in the mix, and the percussion can often feel kind of clunky, especially on a song like Broken Glass. And that's not even mentioning Favorite Daughter, which has some god-awful vocal layering and buzzing synths that pair so weirdly with the crisp percussion. I don't know, that song is hard to explain, but it does not sound good. And overall, I just don't find the choruses as strong as Lorde's best, or even anywhere close. And it doesn't feature her strongest vocal performances, with a lot of them almost sounding like she's trying too hard. There's just not really a whole lot worth going back to on this album, in my opinion. So, I guess for me it's a 6 out of 10. On the bright side, one thing I can say about Lorde that I do respect a lot is she never makes the same album twice, so pretty much nothing would surprise me in the future stylistically. But both Solar Power and Virgin seem lacking in profoundness, despite her seeming to think she's an amazing artist making great art, and obviously that's all subjective, and I respect her confidence and self-love. But I'm personally becoming less and less intrigued with each new Lorde album, and I think with that confidence comes, at least for me, less quality. That seems to be how it's gone with Lorde's past two albums. But again, it's all subjective. And to me, I just feel like her music that clicks with me the most is in the past. But I guess we'll have to see what happens. This is the debut studio album from Charlotte Lawrence, someone who is very self-aware about being a Nepo baby as the daughter of Krista Miller and Bill Lawrence, who are very well known in the TV industry. And she has basically admitted that that's the reason for her popularity, and I respect her a lot for admitting that. But it doesn't mean the album can't be good, right? And the first thing I'll say is I've been trying to figure out exactly who this reminds me of. It's the sort of fairly mellow indie pop with a slight rock edge, but not enough to be considered alternative rock, although I could totally see this being played on alt stations. I am reminded a little bit of Gracie Abrams in the songwriting style, Gracie Abrams actually co-wrote one of these songs and is a childhood friend of Charlotte's. But vocally, it actually reminds me a little bit of Chapel Roan, and at points Katie Gavin of Moona. And I saw more familiar names in the songwriting credits, including Benjamin Gibbard of the Postal Service and Death Cab for Cutie fame, as well as Righty Biederer, I hope I pronounced that correctly. And that's a name I haven't heard for a while, and which most people probably haven't heard at all. But let's just say if you live in Canada and listen to the radio, that name reminds me of one song which I heard way too much back in the day, and you probably did too. Anyways, this is a great example of an album that I feel really should be much better than it is. Because it's the sort of album that can be right up my alley, with the emotional songwriting about the complexities of humans that sends a big fuck you to anyone who has wronged her while also acknowledging her own flaws. And I can praise this album specifically beyond the kind of album that it is. I didn't know how badly I needed to hear the line, "You can make a mistake, it's not like you planned it," in the opening track. And the deniability while losing trust in someone on Us 3 is pulled off immensely well with the damn near immaculate production and probably one of the best vocal performances on the album. But beyond those first two tracks, well, there are some other moments that show promise and elements that I can praise, but they often come with serious asterisks. Hollywould has a somewhat pleasant sound to it, but also is obnoxiously generic. Morning has a good chorus on paper, but the acoustic guitar is super underpowered in the mix. Body Bag is one of those strange cases where the song just feels like it really should be great, but it isn't quite clicking, and I don't really know why other than something's missing. That's all I can really say. And then Dog has a promising build-up only to lead into a super underwhelming chorus, and it's really awkward. And overall, I think the production is probably the biggest thing holding this album back. Although maybe it's not as much holding it back than it is failing to make the most of an admittedly fairly weak album with songwriting that doesn't feel particularly unique, with the exception of a few moments. And while Charlotte Lawrence is a good singer, I wouldn't say she's exceptional, and she probably needs the right production to complement her vocal style in order to fully click for me, and this just doesn't get there. And the clunky drums and tracks like Fear of Falling and Ophelia don't help at all. It's an issue throughout a lot of this album. Now back on the topic of the lyrics. Well, again, I do like a lot of the themes, such as the ways that jealousy can make you question everything on Morning, refalling for someone who's already proved they're not worth it on Violet Blue, wondering what could have been on Ophelia, and trying to save a friend from an unhealthy relationship on Better Than This. But these themes aren't really presented with a lot of complexity or detail to help try and understand the why behind it all. And maybe that's partially the point. Humans are complicated, so it's difficult to truly get it. And we might just have to live with what we've got, including our own inner thoughts and desires. But that brings me back to the point that if this could have captured the mood better of whatever feelings and scenarios the songs are describing, I might have liked this a lot more. As it is, the songs just feel really dry and not all that interesting. Oh, and then there's Ballerina, which feels like it's caught between two ideas of an empowerment anthem versus an angry criticism, with some weird musical and lyrical contrast that makes for a complete miss, even putting aside how it sounds like a bad Carolyn Polachek song. So as a whole, look, I don't think this album is bad, but I wouldn't say it's essential listening either. Still, if you like acts like Gracie Abrams or Lucy Dacus, this might be up your alley. I don't really think it's for me, which is why I'm only going to give this a light 6 out of 10, but I think it starts and ends pretty well, and there are some promising moments in between, just not enough to make me want to go back to it all that much. That's all. Alright, I'm going to make this one quick. Because was anyone really going into this new Benson Boone album with high expectations? I know I certainly wasn't, after my only two introductions to him being the very obnoxious Beautiful Things and Slow It Down, which I think is probably even worse. And now he's become one of the biggest memes in the pop music world, mostly because of how bad his music sucks. And we got exactly what I and most others were probably expecting. Overproduced pop music with cringy lyrics that are either try-hard or just straight up basic, with screechy vocals and underpowered guitar, with percussion that doesn't complement this at all and just winds up sounding clunky, and I could go on and on dissecting each little detail that makes this such an obnoxious listen. But what's the point? Benson Boone is one of many artists in today's day and age trying to bring a throwback sound to the mainstream, and it's certainly working in terms of success, but there's nothing unique that makes Benson Boone stand out as an artist. And if I want to listen to an uninteresting retread of previous artists, I may as well at least listen to someone with tolerable vocals. There are a few decent moments here and there, but nothing is worth going back to, and the only reason I even listened to this was because I saw all the negative reviews and thought it might be funny and could make for an interesting review. As it is, I'm actually kind of disappointed that this isn't worse, or at least that it isn't bad in a more interesting way, because then I might at least have more to say. In actuality, this is just an easy skip if you ask me. 4 out of 10, not worth my time. Alright, so James McMurtry is definitely an artist whose discography I want to listen to at some point, but I decided to go into this new album without any previous experience with his music. But I really like country music, and I've heard a lot of good things about James McMurtry, so my expectations were fairly high, and this album is certainly a great first impression for me. Look, as far as I can tell, there doesn't seem to be a specific theme or storyline throughout the album, but each track absolutely has something to offer in its own right, ranging from themes of getting older on South Texas Lawman, to a sense of shame in being a part of such a fucked up society on Sons of the Second Sons, to a stark story of one's experience finding out about the 2001 World Trade Center attacks on the song Annie, a track that literally brought me to tears, and that doesn't happen often. I also love the grimy guitar timbres, the drums that sound great in the mix, and the vocals from James, which bring so much emotion and feeling to this entire album, and it's a big part of the reason why this works so well. Look, I would go into more detail, but I'm in a big time crunch, and I want to get all these reviews out so I can get back to somewhat of a schedule, and I also feel like there's a lot more to dive into with a lot of these lyrics, and I'm just not very educated personally. But if there's anything I misinterpreted or anything I missed, feel free to point it out. So I'll give this an 8 out of 10 on sound and emotion alone, but I do feel like I might be missing a piece of the puzzle. But also, this album does feel like a motivation for me to learn more about the world, not only because of all the references in the lyrics, but because of the ways that it shows how ignorance can be harmful. So maybe I should actually go learn more and stop being the smartest person in the room. Because in this room I am. I'm also going to keep this one pretty brief. I guess I'm doing that with all these reviews, honestly. Partially because of time reasons and my insane work schedule, but also partially because I couldn't find the lyrics to this album, which makes it a little trickier to go in depth on. And it's also because after a few listens, this didn't really stick with me a whole lot. On my first listen, I was quite intrigued by the album, and I was wondering if a few more listens might make it really connect for me. And unfortunately, the more I've listened to it, the more I've realized it's not totally for me, even though I can appreciate the ways that this duo pairs the synths and vocals in ways that provide some real tension, despite being a mostly chill album, likely suited for night driving or maybe just chilling alone in your room at night with headphones on. And it is a cool experiment with some really strong melodies here and there, bookended with arguably the two best songs on the album, Bells, and also the really gorgeous Kelly Lee Owens-esque title track that closes the album, and that is a huge compliment. But beyond that, I cannot deny the fact that this does feel a little one note a lot of the time, where the tracks blend together, and I can't help but feel like even if I gave this more listens, these songs just wouldn't have a whole lot of impact for me, especially because even in some of the stronger moments compositionally, like Brick or Stone, the production can hold it back, such as how that song's percussion is way too underpowered in the mix. The album reminds me a lot of Carolyn Polachek, second time I've mentioned her in this video. And honestly, that's why I would absolutely recommend this to anyone who's curious, because keep in mind, I've never personally been a Carolyn Polachek fan myself, which might explain me being somewhat lukewarm on this project. I do think this is still pretty good. I'll give it a 7 out of 10, but beyond the overall style and some cool ideas here and there, I did find this a little underwhelming. Absolutely not bad, just not totally for me. Alright, so I don't review as much hip-hop on this channel as I'd like to, and the reasons why, well, I feel like there's a much deeper conversation that could be had here that I don't really want to do at 3 in the morning. That's when I'm filming this. But yeah, I do really want to review more hip-hop on this channel. A lot of it is just, there's so much to take in usually with a hip-hop album. There's so many lyrical details. There's just so much packed in. And I often just feel like with how busy my schedule is, I feel like I'm not really going to do the albums justice if I just give them a quick review. But I do feel like I need to find some way around that, because I want to explore all albums that I listen to in more depth and really try and understand them better. But unfortunately, that's not really what I've been doing, because I just don't have that much time to review as many albums as I'd like. But look, I definitely want to at least listen to more hip-hop this year. I haven't heard the newest Backwash album. I haven't heard the newest Billy Woods album. I haven't heard the newest McKinley Dixon album. Actually, no, I listened to the Billy Woods album once. But I want to listen to those albums more and really explore them. And I'll probably do that sometime this year. In case you're wondering, I did listen to GNX by Kendrick Lamar last year. I just didn't review it. I kind of stopped reviewing albums for a while at the end of last year. And GNX by Kendrick Lamar, if you want my quick thoughts. I did really like it. It wasn't my favorite Kendrick Lamar album. I haven't listened to it for a while. It reminds me I want to go back to it. But anyway, on the topic of Little Sims, I've never been a huge Little Sims fan, just based on the music of hers that I have heard. I didn't love Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. I didn't love No Thank You. And this album here seems to mostly be about her lawsuit of her former producer who failed to repay a huge loan to Sims, despite not all of the money even being used for the show it was intended for. And it is a really messy situation, which I don't know all the details of, but I do hope everything works out for Sims, and I respect the way that she writes about this, and also making it about one's personal journey in the aftermath of such a horrible situation and loss of trust in a friend. Unfortunately, this also just isn't resonating with me at all, and I think it's a case of this album just not being for me. And honestly, that's been Little Sims all along for me. Every time I've listened to an album of hers, I can absolutely acknowledge that she's an amazing rapper and has great wordplay, just not really in a way that does a whole lot for me. And I think that's okay because, not every album is going to click for everyone. It doesn't make it bad. But it does make it a little bit of a tricky album for me to review because while to me it often feels like she goes in circles lyrically with lines about self-love, which do have a good message but don't feel particularly unique, I also can admit the subtle differences in each song can have some magic. And while I'm personally not a huge fan of Sims' delivery, which often sounds kinda half-assed to me, I also realize it is intentional and it's part of what makes her so unique. And while I personally find the production a little awkward with the instruments blending together kind of weirdly, it does bring more of an emphasis to Little Sims herself. And unfortunately to me, that's just not really what I want to focus on as much, but it does still make sense. So look, as much as I will almost never claim to really know what I'm talking about when I'm reviewing albums, this album review especially, more than pretty much any other, I'd say just ignore my yapping. I'm only really doing this so I can have somewhat of an opinion on this shared on the internet, and even then, it's not even a full opinion. I really just didn't click with this album, but I also feel like there's so much more to it that I'm just not picking up on. So, look, for me, it's a 6 out of 10. Again, I am looking forward to listening to more hip hop this year and hopefully reviewing some of it in more depth than this review at least. But yeah, this album just isn't really doing much for me, and that does not mean that it isn't good. Alright, thank you for watching. I know this wasn't my best video ever. The lighting quality probably sucks. My voice probably sounds really bad. Again, it's 3 in the morning. I think I need to go to bed. So yeah, right now it's Sunday, July 6th, technically, because it's after midnight. And maybe I'll have this video up at some point in the next 24 hours. I'm hoping I will, but we'll see when that ends up happening. We'll see when I find the time to actually edit it and upload it. I don't think there'll be much editing to even do because these reviews are so short. I barely even said anything about each album. But I am hoping to be back on somewhat of a schedule. That's what I'm trying to do, is each week listen to a certain number of albums and then just look at which ones I want to review. I don't know, I'm just yapping at this point. It's 3 in the morning. I need to go to bed. Anyway, thank you for watching. Again, all of these thoughts on these albums are just my personal opinion. I'll be back with more videos soon.